take your life seriously. Welcome back to, I'm just going to call it the podcast, and this is the first thing I want to address. In episode 1, we made it very clear that we didn't have a name for the podcast because this is something we kind of started on a whim. Well, we didn't start on a whim, did we? We've had the idea, we procrastinated on it for a little while, and then we finally came to the decision that it's better to start now and get perfect later rather than go back and forth in our minds about we need this kit, that light, and all this garbage. So we just decided to start. When we started so quickly that we didn't have a name. So the first exciting bit of news is we have a name. Ricky, let them know what we're calling it.
It is called the No Limits.
No, it's not. He's forgot. It's called the Beyond Limits.
Beyond Limits podcast, because we're going to keep it tied in with Mark's theme already that he's got his No Limits brand. And also we're going to tie it in with that sort of aspect.
This is the content we're going to cover, right? Is, personal development, mindset, with jiu-jitsu because we love it, fitness, mental health, all these things, what I think human beings as a species sometimes limit themselves on, like goal setting and all these kind of things. And we want to cover topics that help the listeners and the viewers on YouTube to go beyond their own self-imposed, self-perceived limits. So that's the first bit of exciting news.
The Beyond Limits podcast.
Spread the word.
Okay,
Tell
so
everybody.
It's big. But we went through about 25 names, so that's why I was a bit confused there about what we was going through. Put me on the spot, which you'll see a lot.
And that's what's going to be unique about this podcast. It's not going to be polished. It's not going to be perfect. We're going to say things that are wrong. We're going to stutter, and we'll get through it because we're normal. We're human, like everyone listening, and we make mistakes.
And I do think that's what we want to show as well, that sort of progress, because we could have actually went back and recorded the first podcast again. It probably would have been a bit better because we've got better mics now, better lighting, and we know what we're going to talk about. But then we're not showing the process that we're talking about is like improving on the way. So never starting perfect because it's not a realistic approach. We're going to start, and working on stuff as the way. So as you guys tune in, you should see small changes. If you see us stop changing and getting better, then I want you to call us out on that as well and say, yeah, guys, come on, you haven't upgraded whatever in a long time. Get a grip of yourselves.
Yeah, and if you are viewing this on YouTube, you will notice, because you can see the difference in the first 2 episodes, Ricky and his lovely wife, Becky, have been in over the weekend, hanging curtains, positioning lights, and painting bits and pieces, cleaning up. This is a journey that we want to take you, the listeners and viewers, on with us to see that often in life it is a good idea to just start now and get perfect later. Now, the first subject of our first proper podcast is failure.
Yeah, and we discussed about different topics that we wanted to talk about. But I think the most sort of deep concept that we talk about a lot is how important failure is. And I think if we condensed all of our sort of personal development stuff that we use, failure has sort of probably been one of the biggest tools for both of us, I believe, or definitely for me. And I'm not sure if that's the same for you.
Yeah, and what you just said there is bang on. It's one of the most useful tools. And this is the way we look at it, I think, and certain people look at it, is with a different mindset, right? And I think this is where we should start this. Why do human beings look at failure and view failure as such a negative thing?
Yeah, it's a strange one because obviously doing something wrong and failing at something that you set out is painful, and I do think that it's viewed on as a negative sort of negative subject when you do fail at something, or you get something wrong, should we say, instead of calling it failure, something wrong. But that is a massive reflection of adjusting your behavior or whatever to adjust that failure, and then go again and try and improve on something else. So for me, it is a negative, but I'm not sure why. And I suppose it is because you're aiming for something and then you're not getting there. But it's almost like at least you're aiming towards something. You're going in some direction. I don't know. Why do you think it's negative?
So I was at a personal development seminar a couple of years ago, and this subject came up, and the analogy that was used, it was so good because it's completely relatable, and there's not a person on the planet, I don't think, that can say that they haven't done this, right? And what they talked about was babies, right? So when babies are learning to walk, what do? They go over, they'll crawl over to like the sofa, they'll drag themselves up into a standard position, they'll maybe take a step, maybe two if they're like super advanced, and they'll fall over.
Yeah.
And what's the first thing that a baby does?
Yeah,
it giggles.
Yeah.
And it laughs and it looks around. It doesn't go, oh, that's it, I'm done, I failed that walking thing, I'm not going to try that. Because imagine if you just gave up there, you'd have 8 billion people crawling around the planet because they gave up walking at the first attempt. But babies don't understand what failure is. And I think it's not till you get older and you grow and you go through school and your environment is molded in a certain way and you watch enough, I'm going to say negative content on TV and social media, that you start to look at failure as this thing that's fatal and it's a bad thing. And it's disappointing, really, that's the way the world kind of is. And it's I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I suppose looking at it from that sense, you are right that babies don't have that innate sort of response to failure. But then, I suppose that is because of the way we're viewed when we do fail. So it's other people's opinions on our failure that matter to us almost. So it's like, how do you are failing, but as you said, babies don't really care what other people think.
Right.
When I suppose we do. We all care about, okay, what does your friend think? What does your wife, partner think? And then if you fail, then it's like, oh, are they going to think less of me for that failure?
Right.
So I think that's probably that's probably a point there where you're scared of it because of other people's viewpoints of that failure. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as you grow, you become a product of your environment, right? And the role models that you have as you're going through childhood and adolescence and all this. So if you have parents, let's say, that, maybe you're let's take a single person sport like gymnastics, right?
Yeah.
And you start at these club comps and you fail, but your parents continue to encourage you. And then, you do a few more of them, you start to see a bit of success. Then you step it up to maybe regional comps and you fail a few times, but they keep on encouraging you and they keep on saying, I know it sucks, and they wipe away the tears and but you go back to training on Monday and you're better than before. The same as jiu-jitsu, right?
Yeah.
And you go back and you're better. But then the flip side to that is if you grow up in an environment where, let's not say your parents, maybe you've got a sports coach who just drills you like in a negative way every time you fail. It's like, you suck, that's rubbish, you're not doing it right. You start to get a bit anxious and develop this negative anchor associated with failing. So I think as you grow, those early years where it's important, where children are developing, if it's not handled in the right way, that's why we start to look at failure as this really negative thing.
Yeah, from other people's perspective. I know what you mean. And I suppose that's the negative side of failure. But I think I honestly believe that no one gets very far with that attitude. I think failure is sort of, in business, in anything, you've got to be willing to fail. And I don't think there's anyone out there that's not got to where they want to be in sports, finance, as a father, without sort of failing first. So I think the negative side of it is there, but let's talk about the positive side of it now a little bit more.
Yeah.
So positive sides for you, what would you view that on?
So I wrote a list. I'm not scared of a list or two. I think there's going to be a lot more of these in the future, but I did that because it's going to give us a structure and it's going to enable us to really dive deep into some quite important topics. So, what is good about failure? I've got 10 points here. And the first one that I wrote down was that failure is a stepping stone to success.
Yeah.
You have to fail along the way to eventually succeed. And there's a million reasons that we're going to talk about a lot of different things, but I think it's a necessary part of success. Not just maybe, let's take an athlete again, not in a professional capacity solely, but also in a personal capacity.
Yeah.
You know, about what you learn from those failures. So,
Yeah,
you know,
and I suppose it can be in any approach of life because, you know, especially personal as well. Like I failed a few times personally with stuff and I've had to sort of like address that. And if you don't address it, then I suppose you suffer the circumstances. So your first point was what? Sorry?
It's a stepping stone to success.
Stone. Yeah, and I think it's definitely a stepping stone to that. And it's also a way of directly knowing what bit you need to fix to get to the next stage.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So let's just use BJJ for an example.
Mm-hmm.
So my first competition, I think I talked about it last time, I'm not too sure, but I got mounted on, and it was after 3 weeks of training, and it was difficult for me to get the guy off. I was just going up and down. I didn't know the amount of escape properly, how you meant to bridge up and go over one shoulder and try and angle the guy off and trap aside. I didn't really know that concept, but that failure then told me that straight away. It was a direct reflection of, okay, you didn't get past, let's just say, level 1 of whatever game you're playing, and the reason you didn't get back past that stage is because you didn't know the mount escape. Now, looking back on that, it wasn't just the mount escape. It was obviously because my guard wasn't efficient. I didn't have a game plan, but it just gives me a little bit of information. I can then fix that bit of my game, go forward again, and then eventually, you know, you build a bigger picture of that reflection. So I think, yeah, it's a stepping stone, but also it's great quick feedback. You haven't got to wait years for that. You can get the feedback instant.
And so, I mean, how you're a brown belt now, right?
Yeah.
And you've done that in a very short space of time. How long have you been training?
Well, I've probably been training about 6 years.
Right.
But, you know, if we talk about mat time, so I know I'm doing 4 times the average. And we'll probably go deeper into this concept during the podcast, but every week that I'm doing is a month of somebody else's time. To break it down simply, every year is 4 years. So if I've done 5 years full-time training, which I pretty much have, it means that is 20 years of someone else's journey. So it's a lot of condensed time and a lot of failure in a short amount of time.
So this is what I was going to say, right? You're just talking there about how, you know, you're in this fortunate position where you're almost in a accelerator, right? Because you're doing so, but you're also accelerating all those micro failures along the way, starting from that first comp you talked about, all the other comps that you've done, every specific session, every sparring session, and you know, you fail constantly, right? Even this morning when we were training, I'm sure you failed in a few things. I certainly did.
Definitely.
But you use them as stepping stones to success, and I hope you don't mind me bringing this up, but from the talks that we've had, your long-term goal is to get your black belt and to be the world champion, right? To win the world championships.
Yeah, definitely. And I've envisioned that from white belt, and it's almost like we do talk about failure a lot, and it is important. It gives me that quick feedback, so I compete a lot. But it's also about the person you become on that journey. So let's just say that I get to black belt, and unfortunately, I try a few times. I go as hard as possible. I don't get to that world championship black belt medal, but I've set that goal. So that's guiding my life for the last 5 to sort of 6 years of where I'm going to go, how I'm going to structure my like failure, which is what, okay, I'm going to go into competitions every couple of months. I'm going to hopefully learn, but then I will fail along that journey, and I'll speed it up quickly. And then when I get to black belt, you know, I'm going to be in my opinion, a much better black belt with hitting those fails all the time. And if I don't make it to that world stage, then I've still gone through that journey, and it's been fast. I've learned a lot, and you know, without being big-headed, I do feel like I'm a good black belt as well. Well, I will be a good black belt, should we say? So, that journey was powerful. So that goal, sometimes you might not achieve that goal, but like I've become a BJJ black belt. That's like, wow.
You forget about what an achievement that actually is as a byproduct.
Itself, and that could be the same in business. I might set myself a business goal where I'm like, okay, I want to earn this figure in 2 years, and I might not get to that figure.
Right.
But the information you learn on that path towards that goal is sometimes more valuable than the actual achieving the goal itself.
Yeah.
Because you can get further with that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And then if you know, my second point here is that failure builds resilience. So if you break all that down, like some people really struggle with failure, and you could tell them to try and pick the positives out of those negatives, but they just can't see the wood for the trees. But one of the gifts I think that resilience gives us, failure gives us, is that whether you're consciously aware of it or not, you're building resilience. You're getting mentally tougher, physically tougher. and when you fail again in the future, and you will, because we all will, you're more equipped to deal with it and understand that, all the concepts behind it, that it's part of a journey.
I think that resilience, I think of it as grit almost, and resilience. I think that is really powerful these days. I think it's something that's it's like hard to attain because you've got to fail a lot, and I think it's something that's missing. So if you have that sort of like superpower almost of being willing to grit things out, being more resilient on tasks and stuff, it's something that a lot of people haven't got. So it's like you almost stand out because you've got that sort of resilience in your mind because you failed a lot, which is crazy to think. As a child, you won't get taught, oh, you keep failing and then you'll be even better after 10 years. It's a strange concept to sort of talk about, but I think that's why we want to sort of get it out there.
But and I think, in a way, this is why it's important when you are a kid that you actually fail. You're not too protected from failure. You know what I mean? You're not rewarded for, being average or below average. You have to just kind of understand that in that situation, in particular circumstance, you didn't make the grade. You lost a competition or you quote unquote failed, to build that resilience. Because once you leave school, I've kind of been through this with my 18-year-old daughter now. Once you leave school and the big bad real world's out there, they're going to get hit hard sometimes, and you need a level of resilience to be able to deal with that stuff. And failing as a child, as you grow in, I think equips you well to be able to do that.
I think so. I think it's like, you don't want anyone to be like, oh, you failed. You want us, like, even if you don't achieve a goal, so let's just take it back to a competition and you don't achieve that medal, you wouldn't want your parents to be like, oh, come on, you could have done better. But they can honestly say, look, you did really well stepping up to that challenge. This is what you did great. And this is what we could potentially work on for next time. And it's so I think we're going into like the realms of like environment and how people will sort of will handle that, because different people will talk through that situation in different ways. And I think it's important that your environment is sort of like, for me and you, for an example, we'll compete together, and if you lose, I'm like, okay, mate, yeah, you did well, but this is what we did well, this is what we need to work on for next time, and then we move on. But if I was a coach where, let's just say, you lost and I was like, fuck's sake,
you suck,
I was just like, oh, we've trained together, we've been doing this, mate, like, what are you doing, blah, blah, blah. You're gonna be like, oh, do you know what, I really suck, I'm not. But instead, you're highlighting the good points. And you do the same with me. You'll highlight and you'll say, mate, well, maybe we could do this a little bit better. And we've done the same with the podcast. We've like looked at the podcast. That worked really well. What do we need to do together to sort of work on the next point to get it higher? So I think having an environment that supports failure is important as well. Yeah.
I'm going to talk actually a little bit. Something came into my head then about the competition I did last year at the Rio Open.
Yeah.
So I probably talked about this before, but I never got into BJJ to compete. I got into it because it added a lot of value to my life. I love the community. I love the personal growth and progression that it gave me as I was working my way through the belt system to eventually, hopefully, get to a black belt level. But I entered that Rio comp last year, kind of because I felt I had to, as a trustee of the charity. They put on their first organised event, and I thought, okay, I'm going to have to do this. And obviously the para world is very small. There are very few para jiu-jitsu athletes. So when I turned up, I was given an option basically by the judges. It said you can go with the white belts. I was a blue belt, two-stripe blue belt at the time, or you can go with the brown belts. Now, in my mind, martial arts and these kind of things, they're all about growth and pushing yourself and wanting to challenge yourself to figure stuff out. So I said, okay, I'll go with the brown belts, knowing that I'm probably going to lose, right? And I went in and I fought a guy called Stuart Penn, and I did lose. I lost 14-0. And I remember driving home, and my kids were there as well. So it made it a little bit worse for me watching, thinking about them watching their dad get dominated. And I was driving home and I felt down, and it took me maybe 2 or 3 days of feeling like shit. And then I was like, well, hang on a minute, Mark. Like, you never got in to compete, right? Into the sport to compete. You did it last minute. You stepped up 2 belt levels. I found out later that Stuart was the para world jiu-jitsu champion.
Well.
Do you know what I mean? He's training a lot, and he's got great coaches around him that have been working with him non-stop. And I remember I went into it, I didn't even know the rules, and I didn't even realise I didn't know the rules until halfway through the match when I looked at the clock and I saw this points. I'm like, oh yeah, you can score points as well. But my point being, I learned so much from that failure that I actually a couple of weeks later went to Jersey to meet Stuart and his professor, to train with them, to learn from them for what they've been doing for the last 9 years. Came back from Jersey better. Yeah. My game was better. Then, you know, we entered the Army one, a Aldershot, didn't we? And I managed to win that one. And then the other weekend was the Devon Open, won one, lost one. Yeah. You know, and it's bizarre and it sounds cliche and corny, but I learned so much more from losing than I did from winning.
Yeah, 100%. Sometimes I find exactly that. You find you learn more. So even sometimes you could get on a winning streak where you got gold, but you've subbed everyone and you're like, well, you know, if my goal was not really to be a good white belt, blue belt, purple belt, it's to be a good black belt. I've not learned anything from that experience. So sometimes it can be a little bit worse. And just to go back on what you said about being a dad in that situation where you did fail, from my perspective, that's you showing examples to your children. Right. Like, it's okay to step out on those mats and it's okay to fail. That's like a really important lesson. So I think it is daunting, and like I don't even like my kids when I compete, like looking and watching. But I think you're showing a really good example there of like, okay, kids, look, you just step up. It doesn't matter I'm fighting a brown belt or you know what he is. I'm still going to step up. I'm going to try my hardest, and I'm going to learn points from them. And then not only that, you're going to take a few days to evaluate it. You're going to think, right, okay, I need to source this person out, travel there, train with them, come back. Yeah, like that whole process there you've shown to your children is like really valuable. Yeah, because you know you're showing them that failure's fine. Yeah,
and that really hit home because about 2 weeks later, Mason's football team, his football team lost a tournament, and he cried about it. Yeah, they all did. They were devastated, and I took him to the side and I said, "You remember the other week when I got beaten at the jiu-jitsu comp?" And then I talked him kind of through how I felt terrible to start with, like he was feeling in the moment. However, you'll learn from it, you'll grow from it. You know, that's a team sport. And guess what happened on Saturday?
They won, did they?
They won the league.
Nice.
They won the league, and he got man of the match. Wow. The same day that Argyle got promoted. That's awesome. And I'm just like, see what I said? It may take a little bit of time, but you take the positives from that failure and you be flexible and you change your approach a little bit, keep the goal the same, but remain flexible in your approach. And then boom, you've just won the league. And I could go into a whole story about how the football team was formed by a coach walking. It's amazing. It's an incredible story. I'll probably talk about it later, but yeah, it was awesome to see them do that. Now,
so what other points? We've gone over environment. We've gone over sort of how it teaches you grit or resilience.
So I'm going to try and cover 2 points in one here. Okay. So it can give you feedback and give you an opportunity to try a new approach, and it can be a motivator that drives us to a higher level to achieve success. So absolutely good. You know, sorry that I'm talking about this comp again, but you know, it gave me a lot of feedback and forced me to change my approach, change the way that I did jiu-jitsu, change my game, and it motivated me for that next comp. You know, I had to learn the rules. Yeah. I had to you did that seminar, didn't you, about point scoring? And I sat in on that, like, okay, how do I score points? Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Because if I can't sub people, because the fact I've got 3 limbs missing and I'm fighting mostly able-bodied people, how can I win on points? And it worked, and that helped. You know, it's just and it can be a strong motivator. Like you can take those losses quite bad.
I think so. A lot of the things we're going to probably talk to on this podcast is going to be we might put it back to the mats in a few situations, but I think that's important because we only knew what we were interested in with each other when we started to talk to each other about lessons on the mat and how it and it's a real good sort of look at as that instant feedback we're talking about is it's instant. So if I get caught in a guillotine, okay, I left my head out for too long. So it's an instant feedback loop of okay, I've done this and messed up. I need to try and address it. And it's never an instant fix. It will take a long time for you to sort of fix those things. And then another issue will come up. You're getting caught somewhere else. But I think the mats is sort of a really good analogy of how you can sort of instantly give yourself feedback and move on. And if you do lose, you know, if you get caught in a triangle in a competition and it's the final and you lose because of that triangle, you get a submission. For anyone that's listening that's not into jiu-jitsu, you're going to learn the escape from that submission. So you're going to learn how to escape it. You're going to learn why you got caught, because it's going to be so painful for yourself that you sort of lost in that. And that's the same with business, okay? And it might be the same with divorce, unfortunately. The same when, you know, you might mess things up as a father sometimes, and then you'll get that feedback. It's not as instant, I don't feel, as the mats. Sometimes it can be a bit slower, and you might regret, especially with kids as well. I feel like sometimes they're almost like growing plants almost. It's like if you do something when you're younger, you know, I'll let them have a Nintendo Switch, for an example. Right. I've given both my boys this Nintendo Switches now, and a part of me's thinking, I should have done that, but then I use it as sort of a bribe almost sometimes. So I'll be like, if you can train jiu-jitsu to the sparring class, then, you know, after you can play your Switch
absolutely,
for half an hour or whatever. But it's a difficult. I think the mats, you get instant feedback straight away. Sometimes in life you don't get that instant feedback, and it might creep up and hit, you know, bite you on the butt a bit later on in life. But it's still feedback, and it's still that. It's just a bit longer.
All right. So here is something that I think is. This is a great point and quite an important one, that failure can teach humility.
Yeah.
So we've all seen it. I'm going to try and think of an example as I'm talking, but in the combat sports world, for example, maybe an undefeated fighter gets a little bit too cocky, a little bit arrogant, thinks he can't be stopped by anybody. Then all of a sudden, boom, knocked out by a nobody that no one's ever heard of. You know, that's going to humble you, right? Quickly, right? And in fact, I know we're dominating the conversation talking about jiu-jitsu here, but it for me is probably one of the sports that humbles you the most, because I mean, you know, right, there's this little subsection in jiu-jitsu of what I would call at school nerds, right? Yeah. They got curly hair, the big thick glasses, they're like 3 stone wet through. They're killers, mate. Absolutely. Like, so, and you roll with these people and you're like, what is this nerd doing to me?
Absolutely throwing you around.
And it humbles you, man.
That's true.
It humbles you so much. Like, I'm just trying to think of a good example. All right, so Anderson Silva, right, in the UFC, great guy, great fighter, legend. But when I can't remember what fight it was. I think it was Chris Weidman, when he's ducking his head, and then bosh, he lands on the chin and he's out cold. You know, he must have left that fight, went back in the locker room and thought, what a fool. You know, and it must have humbled him a little bit.
Oh, I think so, massively. I think that's part of the reason why they are so. A lot of people, there's different grades, I suppose, because you've always got that sort of, some people might call it arrogance or self-belief and confidence of some top athletes. Gordon Ryan, for an example, is somebody that can like rub people up the wrong side sometimes. But I do think that confidence that he's got enables him to sort of do well in competition. So it doesn't seem like he's very humble, but then I suppose he's not losing a lot at the minute. But he's had to lose a lot to get to where he is. Which no one really looks at that journey. I know he's competed a lot all through the bouts, and he must have lost during that. And even during the training, he must lose quite a lot. So I think, it does definitely teach you sort of humility and gratitude as well for like, not for winning sometimes, because sometimes you'll win and then you'll be like, oh yeah, I've won. But then sometimes you'll lose, and then it seems like the win after that loss is like, I've really
because you've corrected those mistakes you made, and this is what I'm talking about. You had the growth mindset, and you've changed things. You've changed your approach. The goal is the same, but you've been flexible in your approach. Then you go back to another comp, boom, you win it. That's where the juice is, right?
Yeah, because you've adapted, and that's the growth and the gratitude there. I think you're right. So we've gone through gratitude. What about inspiration for others?
Mate, that's exactly what I was just looking at that on my note. This is a really powerful part of failure, I think, when there are people that can be honest and raw and open enough to talk about their failures without worrying about judgment from people, especially people that we pedestalize, you know, like celebrities, athletes. You look at some of these people, you know, even businessmen, so, oh, they're so lucky. Oh, look how they're gifted, or they had all the resources there and everyone helped them along the way. And you pedestalize, quote unquote successful people. And you know, the negative self-talk we have of ourselves, I think, is, oh, I could never do that. You know, they're special. They were lucky or whatever it is. But then there's a select few of these that will go out into public and go, do you know what? I'm not worried about being judged. I'm going to tell you about the time that I fell flat on my ass, or the time, I went to for that acting audition and I got laughed out of the room, or I went onto that singing audition and I got the red buzzers, or you know what I mean? And when people share those failures, it's so powerful to inspire other people, because then they kind of, for me personally, when you read Arnold Schwarzenegger's books, Sylvester Stallone's book, and all these people that you think are just famous for being actors, right? When you understand their backstory and the amount of times they got kicked in the gutter and they just kept going and kept going, that's inspiring. And that's the kind of stuff I think about when I'm going through a personal period of reflection on failures and stuff.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with that. I think it does teach you sort of, I think that's why we wanted to talk about it first as well, because that's what we're saying, yeah, we fail a lot, and then that's the only reason we've sort of succeed. So, and I think it's then you're changing the sort of narrative of the culture, so you're making it okay to fail.
Yeah.
So, go back to right at the start of this conversation, you talked about the baby analogy and learning to walk. If the culture was stop, then no one would walk. So it's like, you need to change that narrative. And when people see you failing personally, you put it up there and you say, look, I've lost this competition, or I've done this mistake. They're like, well, maybe I can go for something. And if I fail, don't really matter. Everyone's sort of on a journey of their own. And that's the narrative that wants to sort of change a little bit, I feel.
Yeah.
Making it fine to lose. It's such a long game, life in general. It's not like, it doesn't matter what happens today as much. It's like, how can you get better in 10 years?
Yes.
And how can you get better in 30 years? And looking at your life over a massive spectrum of 40 or 50 years of work, let's say, is how can you progress through that time? And I think failure is a massive learning point. So yeah, I think inspiring others to do so. So let me put a question on you then.
Go on then.
So I'm just thinking off the top of my head. So we've been talking a lot about the mats and that kind of stuff, and that's easy for us to relate to and get across. But some people out there that listen to this might not even do BJJ. So what about a failure that is not on the mats? Would you say that you've failed, and then been like, this has sucked, I need to adjust something in my behavior or something? Can you think of one that doesn't include the mats? And I know you've got loads of them in your life, but have you got any that sort of you think would be poignant for the listeners?
I mean, there's millions, mate. It depends how macro or micro you want to go. Like on a micro level, we're talking about being a father, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you might lose your temper with the kids for something silly. And maybe that's because you've had a bad day, or you've got a lot going on and you're a bit stressed. And then, they go to bed and you're lying in bed watching telly at night thinking, I didn't handle that very well. I failed there. I should have been a bit more, I should have calmed myself down. I've been having a bad day. It's no one else's problem. And I should have handled that differently. So that to me is like a failure in itself. But then, like we've been talking about, you reflect on that, you address that. And then the next time you find yourself in that situation where you've had a shitty day and your kids are maybe pushing you, you think back, remember last time when I made the wrong decision and I lost my temper with them? Just, take yourself off 5 minutes, calm yourself down and handle the situation differently.
Yeah, that's a really good sort of analogy, because I think we've all been guilty of that at times.
Absolutely, mate. And anyone who says they're not, they're lying. Yeah.
And I do think I found an approach that's really worked well for me at the minute is, because in the moment you're mad and it could be something silly. What was it last night? It was last night we were watching a film and my boy Noah was 8 was like, well, Dad, I want to make a smoothie. And by the time this film finished and they brushed their teeth, and I was like, look, we haven't really got time to do it. So he was like, well, I want to make it. I was like,
Every night that happens, mate. Not the smoothies, but they know what time they got to go to bed and they push it. I want to do this, want to do that.
More, And I was lost at a little bit. I was like, And then my wife came up to me. She's like, come on, why are you losing it? I was like, I know. So then I'll go back to him, talk to him and say, look, I shouldn't have shouted at you then. I'm just losing it. Let's go downstairs and make a quick milkshake. But the only reason I'm pushing you for time is because it's late. And I know when you don't sleep enough, it then affects your school or it affects your behavior the next day. And we talk about that process of why it's important for it to get loads of sleep. And I apologize for my behavior. And I say sorry. In the moment, I don't do it because you're too lost in the thought. But it's when you step away from the situation. I'm in the kitchen and I'm thinking, should I ever? I'll shut him down. Noah, come down. Let's have a chat. I'm sorry for this. I should have talked to you this way. So I think failure in that aspect is a lot. It can relate to a lot of people, especially parents, because we've all been there.
Absolutely, I know, man. And it can apply to relationships. I remember when I was little, my grandparents have been together since they were a young age. They bought one house. They lived in it their entire life. My granddad's passed away now. My nan's still alive. But I used to look at that as a kid, and I thought, like, that was it. Like, you meet one person, you stay with them for the rest of your life, and you've got this picture perfect thing where you grow old together, and that was success. But I mean, you look at life now, relationships don't last 2 minutes. People are failing all the time. But maybe some people aren't going, okay, because you can't address other people's issues, but where did I go wrong there? What could I have done better?
Yeah.
And even if you have you're in a marriage, long-term relationship, and you have a disagreement with your partner, like with the kids, when you lost your temper, maybe you have an argument with your partner and you think, how could I have addressed that better next time?
Yeah, and speaking to them about it as well. I think, we've both been in relationships, we talked about this morning, quite a long time. So I've been with my wife nearly 18 years, married 10. And I think key to success is that communication of like, okay, I lost my shit today or whatever. I shouldn't have. How can we sort of get around this? And sometimes it's just me explaining to her that, let's say, for an example, I'm trying to get a lot of stuff done in the day so then we can have the evening together. But in order for me to get a lot of stuff done in the day, I have to be like doing stuff fast. So
constantly.
Sometimes, so if I'm saying to my wife, I'm doing this, or she's like, you're on your phone, I'm like, I'm just doing this. And then if I do say like, can you get me this quickly? And sometimes I'll speak to her the wrong way, and then after that I'll be like, look, I'm sorry for speaking like that. I'm just trying to be efficient. So then I can then we get the evening to spend together.
Yeah.
Like that's all. I'm not meaning to speak to you that way because I'm an idiot. Sometimes I am. I'm meaning to speak to you that way because I want to be efficient. So we get the evening together. We get to sit down and relax. We've got nothing else on our to-do list to do. So talking and communicating is one of the keys to my success in that, I believe. And she's the same with me. She'll do some stuff to me and I'll be like, can we figure this out? And let's go for that instant where I said about the smoothie. Then she'll come up to me and speak to me and say, you shouldn't have really done that. Think about it. And then I have to say, yeah, you're right. I shouldn't have done that. So she gives me aspects on where I'm weak, and she'll try and help me out with that. And I think that communication is massive. I don't know if you found that in your relationship.
Absolutely. And I think, with a bit of a pessimistic view, but I think things like marriages and long-term relationships, there are a series of micro failures and things like that, but you just got to learn from them and then readjust. And that's why, you long term, they're successful because you figure out what you've done wrong, you adjust slightly, you communicate, you try and do better all the time. It's just the same in everything else,
Yeah, I suppose some people think, you failed, you've been with your wife 18 years, should I say, whatever. It's easy for you now. That's it. You're just on cruise. Everything's going to be...
No way, man.
No, it's always still failure, isn't it? It's still especially because you're always trying to change, and especially if you're growing together, I think then it's the reason why you are in a relationship, because you do see holes in each other and you can guide each other.
Complement each other, strengths and weaknesses.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, you can sort of guide each other in that aspect. And without getting too much into the relationship side of things, because we're talking about failures.
Yeah.
So it's a success, but only through failure. Yeah.
Do you know what? I tell you what. Sorry to butt in, but I remember, if I rewind the clock, going through military training for the Marines, right? And there was always a bit of a stigma attached to somebody if they got backtrooped, right? So if they failed a test or they were injured, there was always like that, the backtroopers here, like hissing at them. And I always remember thinking, I have to get through this entire thing in one go to be a success from day one, to get in my Green Beret. I can't fail anything. I can't get injured. I have to put in 110% effort, because that is the only marker of success for me.
Yeah.
And it's funny, and I did that. I never failed. I got through from day one as an original and got my Green Beret. But it wasn't until I went to units and started meeting other people, and these guys had either failed something or they were injured, I realized that actually long term they were much better soldiers than I was.
Yeah.
Because when you get injured, for example, you get put in what is now Hunter Company.
Yeah.
And if you can't physically do anything, they're doing lectures,
Yeah,
presentations. They're
more.
building their skills to give presentations.
Yeah.
They were learning way more weapon systems than we were because they had the time in the class. And then when you got to a unit, you know, these guys could rattle off these statistics and, you know, how to do this and that. And I'm like, how do you know all this stuff? And they're like, well, I spent 6 months recovering from an injury and all we did was sit in a classroom. And I'm like, well, actually, long term, you're going to be better than I am. So that failure was a massive gift to you.
Yeah, true.
You know, the perceived failure.
Yeah.
So
we had exactly the same sort of format in army training. And yeah, looking at that aspect, it's long-term vision on that failure, which is going to amount to more. It's interesting, really interesting you say that, because, you know, from the outside perspective, you are right. Oh, you've been back trooped or whatever, or you've been put in, you've paused your training, but you're actually learning more skills.
Yeah.
And then you're coming back in with those new skills, attacking that job role with a load more skills than someone else. Yeah.
It's crazy.
Way of looking at it.
And this is a big one for me, right? This next point is that failure helps us to appreciate success. Could you imagine how boring it would be, right? If everything, it'd be great in the beginning, but everything you tried, you know, you just succeeded at. Oh, right, I want to start a business, 50 million in the first year. I want to be the World Jiu-Jitsu Championship, gold medal, first attempt. I want to be a TV presenter. Bosh, you're hosting the X Factor next to Simon Cowell and the first ever gig you do. It'd be great, but surely there must come a point where you're like, this is boring. Because I don't think human beings thrive unless they're pushing themselves to grow. So if everything's so easy, surely it's boring.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think it must be difficult as you climb that ladder to keep failing. I think that's the hard thing, because you can get to a stage, and you know, sometimes you get these celebrities that are sort of like, nobody tells them no, or no one tells them sort of, they've stopped that. I think that's what happens when you stop failing, because you don't get no feedback loop of the failure.
Just yes, man.
You just get yes,
right.
Yeah, oh, everything you do is right. Yeah, that's a great idea. So you're getting no feedback of anything wrong. You're just getting feedback of everything right. Oh, this is working really well. And I think that sort of can change your sort of luck on life and stuff as well. So I think it must be harder to keep that mentality over a long period. Like I see it in BJJ, when people get to black belt, they stop competing as much. They won't be, you know, and that's various reason, coaching or lifestyle, or whatever. But I think if you're not stepping into that sort of that competition or that realm where you've got risk of failure, it means you stop growing. You stop growing as a person, as a family, as whatever. So I think, yeah, it does teach you. It teaches you all that stuff that we've talked about today.
Mate, this is just a random comment, but when you said about people get to a certain level and they stop competing, I was scrolling through my Instagram the other day, and there's this woman, I think she's called the Jiu-Jitsu Grandma.
Yes,
mate, she's awesome. Oh, she's like 75, mate, competing. I think she actually, the video I saw was her competing against a man, because how many 75-year-old female grandmas are out there doing jits?
Jumping in there as well.
And mate, it was brilliant. And I just, that you know, inspiration. I think she's a blue belt, maybe purple.
Yeah, I think she's purple. I'm sure she is. I've seen some videos of her. I'm sure. And yeah, and you know, to get to that level and that age, I think
it's courage.
It's courage to step into the fire then, because I know a few people that when they're a little bit older, they're then set in their ways. They're like, well, I've lived a good life now, and
start to rot.
Yeah, I know the majority of whatever I know, and they're not thinking about like, oh, let's grow and do some BJJ
constant personal development, mate.
We should try and get her on.
I'm going to finish on this one. Yes. I think we should wrap up in a minute, but this last point I've got says that failure can be a source of self-discovery to help us identify and work on our weaknesses, and I think that's what life is. It is just a long ass journey of constant and never ending improvement, of trying to better ourselves, whether, you know, through all the areas of our lives, fatherhood, career, fitness, finances, whatever it is. That's what it is. And failing helps us discover where we're potentially lacking and give us something to focus and work on to improve. So holistically, life gets better.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head again with that one. It's sort of a real powerful way to transform as well. So you can go from, you know, being someone, for example, that can't run, fail, like try and do a half marathon a few times. Okay, you'll fail maybe, or maybe you'll hit it out after one every 6 months, and then maybe the next year you're doing one a week. Maybe then you're doing a marathon, and then that process might take 3 years where you've failed and you've learned. But then after that 3-year period, you're a different person. You've transformed most aspects of your life. So you as a character, you've developed the grit we talked about earlier on. You've sort of got that resilience. You've took the feedback on board, and you've done all that kind of stuff. And in that process, it's hard to not have the environment that's conducive to failure. Which I mean by that is, on that process, you build up friends that are on the same path as you, so they know that it's okay to fail. So they ain't gonna say like, "Oh, why'd you keep doing that? You keep losing," or they're gonna be like, "Well done, you're doing really well. Keep pushing." So you're gonna transform yourself. The people you hang around with and your environment's gonna transform, and they're gonna be more type of people that's gonna encourage failure. And I think that's what we want to do in general. Try and change the narrative of like, oh, you don't ever want to fail at something, because that's the only process is how we get better. That's what we talked about today. And I think this concept will go deeper into and like during podcast, and maybe we can get on experts in that area, people that know a bit more, maybe the science behind it and what causes that kind of stuff that we can learn into. Because for me, the information's out there. But how do we get it out to people in a way that they understand? Which I think something that maybe I can do.
This is what we're doing.
I'm simple.
And what you said just now about running a marathon, I think that's a perfect analogy to finish on, because life is a marathon, not a sprint. It's a long old game, and we're going to fail along the way. But if we can take a more positive approach to it, develop a growth mindset, embrace it and learn and grow from it, then by the time we get to the end of that marathon, life's going to look pretty good. It's going to be a pretty damn good adventure that we've all been on. And I think in terms of personal development, it's going to give us that best final outcome.
Well, I think you are right. It's over a lifetime span, and it's much better to have a life where you're like, oh, I tried this and this didn't work. I tried this and this didn't work. Instead of life where, I did this and then that was it. Yeah, it worked pretty well, so I just stuck at doing that forever. It's that the hero's journey, almost like analogy. You've got to lose along that way, and that's what you want from life. You don't want a life where everything's easy and it's all good, because it's just a boring existence. You want stuff and failures and challenges and stuff to keep you motivated and what gets you motivated to get out of bed early and train and whatever it is. You need that sort of pathway where it's ups and downs in order to have an exciting life, and that's what we want. We're here for a limited amount of time. We all want to sort of have a life that we can look back on and be proud and say, well, I tried everything I could. Yeah.
Before we finish, let us know in the comments below what kind of topics you would like us to cover. If there are any guests that you would like us to bring on. This is a marathon for us. We're going to be doing this for a long, long time, and we want to make the information that we give you guys and girls as interesting and as valuable as possible. So, as the young kids say, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and let us know your thoughts and feedback.
Nailed it. Episode 2 done.
Cheers, guys.